In the middle of the luxury party, the millionaire's son fell into the pool and began to drown. All the guests, with their champagne glasses in hand, just stared, frozen, as if watching a movie scene. No one moved, until the simple cleaning lady, who was cleaning the edge of the pool, saw everything. Then, without hesitation, she took action that not only saved the boy, but changed the entire course of the party and left the father, who watched everything in shock, with a lesson he would never forget. The clinking of crystal glasses and the hum of empty conversation filled the air of Arthur Sterling's mansion, a polished echo of his immense fortune. For him, however, the evening was an exercise in thinly veiled anxiety. His company's annual party, a grand event to celebrate another year of exorbitant profits and the growth of his vast estate, was a social obligation he despised with every fiber of his being. His eyes, however, rarely strayed from the small figure of his 5-year-old son, Leo, who was playing with a wooden boat near the edge of the illuminated pool. Since the loss of his beloved wife, Helena, 2 years ago, the boy had been his only safe harbor, the only light in a world of ruthless business and superficial relationships. Leo was the most precious inheritance Helena had left him, more valuable than all his stocks on Wall Street or the gold bars stored in Swiss vaults. A highly qualified nanny with an impeccable resume watched over the child, but Arthur's heart was never at rest. The woman was just another of the many investments he made to ensure his son's safety. But peace of mind was a currency his money couldn't buy. He watched the guests, the city's elite in their impeccable attire, mingling across the perfectly manicured lawn. They spoke of their deals, their trips to Europe, their earnings in euros and dollars. But their words sounded hollow to Arthur. He felt like a stranger in his own world, an actor in a play he hadn't chosen. His attention returned to Leo, whose crystalline laughter was the only melody that truly mattered. The boy, with blonde hair just like his mother's, crouched down to reach for the little boat as it floated a bit farther away. The nanny, Beatrice, stood a few feet away, distracted by an animated conversation with one of Arthur's partners. A cell phone in one hand, a champagne flute in the other. A knot of dread formed in the millionaire's stomach. He took a step forward, ready to intervene, to get the woman's attention, but the moment that shattered the night was a blur of panic and sound. The marble tiles around the pool, slick from the spray of the decorative waterfall, had become a treacherous trap. A slip, a muffled cry swallowed by the ambient music, and Leo's small body disappeared into the shimmering blue water. Time stopped. The music seemed to die, the conversation ceasing abruptly. All the guests, those who minutes before had been competing to display their power and wealth, just stared, paralyzed by shock, glasses still in hand. Beatrice screamed, a sharp, helpless sound that cut through the stunned silence. Arthur himself, yards away, felt his legs turn to lead, his feet rooted to the ground by absolute terror. His mind screamed at him to run, to jump, to save his son, but his body refused to obey, betrayed by a wave of fear that was drowning him on dry land. It was then that, from the service area, almost like a mirage, a figure emerged. It wasn't one of his billionaire partners, nor one of the influential guests. It was the cleaner, a woman he had barely noticed before. Her name was Anna. Without hesitating for a single, precious instant, she dropped what she was holding, ran across the grass, and in her simple, worn uniform, dove into the pool. The splash of her body hitting the water was the only movement in a tableau of terrified statues, a sound that broke the spell and shamed them all. Her action didn't just change the course of the lavish party, it left the man paralyzed in his own luxury, in complete and utter shock, watching the woman disappear beneath the surface to retrieve the one thing his vast capital could never replace. Time snapped back to its normal flow with the violence of a bursting dam. Anna emerged from the water with Leo in her arms, moving with a calm competence that put everyone present to shame. Her feet found the pool steps with certainty, and she carried the small, limp body to the marble edge, the water from her simple uniform soaking the cold stone. The silence that followed was heavier than any speech. The nanny, Beatrice, continued to sob, a pathetic and useless figure next to the real drama unfolding. The guests, once pillars of power and influence, now looked like ghosts at their own party, their faces a mixture of horror and embarrassment. None of them moved to help. Arthur finally broke the invisible chains that held him. He ran, his heart hammering against his ribs like a caged bird, and fell to his knees beside the woman he barely knew. Anna paid him no attention. Her eyes were fixed on Leo, with a precision that seemed to come from a place far deeper than mere instinct. She laid the boy on his side, tilted his head gently, and checked his airway. Her hands, accustomed to hard work, were surprisingly gentle and sure. She placed her mouth over the boy's and gave 2 breaths, then began a series of rhythmic compressions on his small chest. Arthur watched, his own breath caught in his throat. He was a man who commanded boardrooms, who moved millions of dollars with a single signature, who had built an empire from bold investments and a sharp business mind. But here, kneeling at the edge of his own opulent pool, he was powerless. His vast capital, his countless assets, none of it mattered. His son's life was not in the hands of an expensive expert he had hired, but in those of an anonymous employee whose salary was a meaningless fraction of his monthly dividends. The irony was a sharp blade in his conscience, a raspy sound, a spasm, and Leo coughed violently, expelling a gush of water. The cry that followed was weak and frightened, but it was the most beautiful sound Arthur had ever heard. He reached for his son, but Leo clung to Anna, his small body trembling with cold and fear, seeking refuge in the woman who had brought him back to the light. The party died instantly. The guests, as if waking from a collective trance, began to disappear. Excuses were whispered, gazes avoiding Arthur's. They retreated in silence, leaving behind a trail of shame and the echo of a celebration that now seemed grotesque. Within minutes, the luxurious garden was empty, except for Arthur, Leo, the sobbing nanny, and Anna, who had taken off her own thin cardigan to wrap around the boy, murmuring words of comfort in his ear. In the distance, the sound of a siren began to cut through the night air, a belated announcement that the real world was finally arriving to help. Arthur looked at Anna's face, illuminated by the pool's underwater lights, and a question hit him with the force of a punch. Who was this woman? He knew the net worth of every one of his partners, but he didn't know the name of the heroine who had just saved his entire life. The trip to the hospital was a blur of city lights and the soft sound of Leo's breathing, who now slept, exhausted, in Arthur's lap, wrapped in a thermal blanket provided by the paramedics. Anna had accompanied them in the ambulance at his request. She remained silent in the corner, still in her wet clothes, a calm, solid presence amidst Arthur's emotional chaos. He would glance at her from time to time, the same question echoing in his mind. Who was she? In the emergency room waiting area, while Leo was being examined, the silence between them stretched, filled only by the hum of the fluorescent lights. Arthur felt strangely naked and exposed. All his possessions, his vast fortune that brought him access and privilege, seemed useless in this sterile environment. He was just a father, terrified and grateful. When the doctor finally appeared with a reassuring smile, saying Leo was perfectly fine and could go home, a wave of relief so intense hit him that his knees buckled. Only then did he allow himself to truly breathe. Back at the mansion, the atmosphere was ghostly. Half-full champagne glasses and untouched plates of food were silent witnesses to the party that had ended in disaster. The head housekeeper took Leo up to his room, and Arthur was left alone in the immense hall with Anna, who waited near the door, clearly uncomfortable and eager to leave. He stopped her with a gesture. "Wait, please," he said, his voice hoarse. I don't know how to thank you." The words felt small, inadequate for the magnitude of what she had done. He went to his office, a sanctuary of mahogany and leather where he ran his empire. He opened his checkbook, his tool for solving every problem. He thought of a number, an amount that would change anyone's life, a number that represented a tiny fraction of his net worth, but for most people would be a lifetime of security. He wrote it with a steady hand, the same one he used to sign multi-million-dollar contracts. He returned to the hall and extended the check to her. "This is for you," he said. "Consider it a trust for your future, a way to ensure you never have to worry about anything again." He expected tears, a cry of joy, perhaps a trembling, grateful hug. That was how the world worked. Money was the answer. It was the engine, the solution, the great equalizer. What he received, however, was a calm gaze and a slight shake of the head. Anna didn't reach for the paper. Her eyes, brown and deep, met his, and there was no trace of greed or hesitation in them. "I can't accept this, Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice soft but unwavering. Arthur frowned, confused. "You don't understand. This is a reward. You saved my son. It's the least I can do." She gave a small smile, a gesture that didn't reach her sad eyes. "I understand perfectly, and I appreciate the gesture, but I didn't do it for money, sir," she said, with a dignity that completely disarmed him, creating the first crack in his armor of wealth and power. "I did it because it was the right thing to do." She turned, walked to the door, and stepped out into the night, leaving Arthur standing in the middle of his luxurious hall, holding a check that suddenly felt like a useless piece of paper. For the first time in his life, the great multimillionaire felt truly poor, confronted by a form of wealth he didn't understand and that his capital could never buy. The night dragged on interminably for Arthur. Sleep was a luxury his tormented mind wouldn't grant him. He sat in the armchair in Leo's room, watching his son's chest rise and fall in a peaceful rhythm. Every breath was a miracle. The image of the small body sinking into the blue water replayed in his mind, a horror film on an endless loop, always followed by the scene of Anna's refusal. Her dignity haunted him as much as the terror. How could someone reject a sum that represented financial freedom, an amount he viewed as the ultimate solution to any problem? Her words, "I did it because it was the right thing to do," echoed in the mansion's silence. It was a simple, pure logic that exposed the empty complexity of his own world, where every action was calculated, every favor had a price, and every relationship was a form of investment. He looked around at the perfectly decorated room, at the house that was more a statement of his net worth than a home, and felt a profound emptiness. He had built a fortress of wealth to protect his family, but when true danger struck, the walls were made of sand, and he himself had been paralyzed, a powerless king in his own castle. The shame consumed him. The next morning, the sunlight streaming through the massive windows felt accusatory. Arthur didn't delay the inevitable. He summoned Beatrice to his office. The nanny entered with swollen, red eyes, her usual arrogance replaced by a poorly concealed fear. She began to spew apologies, talking about a moment's distraction, about how it all happened too fast. But Arthur cut her off with a cold gesture. He was in no mood for excuses. His son's life had been on the line because of her negligence. "Pack your things, Beatrice. You're fired," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "My driver will take you wherever you need to go. The finance department will handle your severance. It's more than you deserve." She tried to argue, to plead, but his gaze was a wall of ice. She was a liability, a bad deal he was closing. As she left, humiliated, Arthur felt not the satisfaction of justice, but the bitter taste of failure. He had hired her, impressed by a resume listing certifications in first aid, aquatic rescue, and child development. He paid an exorbitant salary for that supposed expertise. He had trusted the paper, the titles, and he had almost paid the highest price. This mistrust spurred him to make a decision, driven by a cold anger and a need to understand the depth of his misjudgment. He called his head of security, an ex-military man named George, who was discreet and efficient. "I want you to vet Beatrice's resume," Arthur ordered. "Every line, every certification, every reference. I want to know everything. I don't care what it costs. Just bring me the truth." George nodded, accustomed to his boss's unusual requests, and disappeared to carry out the task. Arthur spent the rest of the day trying to work, but the numbers on the stock market seemed irrelevant. His focus was elsewhere. Late in the afternoon, George returned to the office, his face grim. He placed a thin folder on Arthur's mahogany desk. "Mr. Sterling," he began, with a formality that foreshadowed bad news. "There's something you need to know about Miss Beatrice's qualifications." Arthur opened the folder, his eyes scanning the initial report. One particular line, underlined in red by George, leaped off the page. His breath caught in his throat. The safety certifications, the life-saving diplomas that were the primary reason for her hiring, were a complete fraud. Beatrice had never set foot in a first aid course in her life. The revelation landed on Arthur with the weight of an anvil. He stared at the report, at the irrefutable proof of his own stupidity. Beatrice wasn't just negligent. She was a sham, an expensive fraud, a luxury accessory he had acquired to furnish the set of his perfect life. He sank into his Italian leather chair, the cool material against his back, and felt a wave of nausea. He, the business magnate, the master of risk assessment and balance sheets, the man whose nose for investments was legendary on Wall Street, had been duped in the most basic way possible. He had placed the life of his son, his most precious asset, in the hands of a liar. The obstacle he now faced wasn't financial or corporate. It was his own conscience, haunted by the image of his paralyzed friends, his fraudulent nanny, and the quiet courage of his employee. He had built an ecosystem based on appearances, and reality had almost destroyed him. In the days that followed, Arthur stepped back from everything. He cancelled meetings, ignored calls from his brokers, and let his company's cash flow run without his maniacal oversight. His attention was entirely on Leo. He took him to the park, sat on the floor to build with blocks, and read him stories before bed, rediscovering the simple joy of being a father, a joy that work and social obligations had overshadowed. In these moments, the image of Anna often came to mind. He would catch glimpses of her in the mansion's hallways, always busy, always quiet, always maintaining a respectful distance. She never mentioned the incident nor the refused check. She acted as if nothing had happened, a professionalism that only deepened his admiration and curiosity. Who was this woman who possessed an integrity worth more than a fortune in dollars? Who had a practical knowledge of life-saving that put Beatrice's fake certifications to shame? One afternoon, while Leo was napping, Arthur found her in the kitchen, meticulously polishing silverware. He cleared his throat, feeling strangely nervous. "Anna," he began, and she turned, her brown eyes expressing a quiet surprise. "I wanted to apologize for everything, for my reaction that night, and for offering you money. It was insensitive of me." She dried her hands on a cloth and gave a small nod. "You don't need to apologize, sir. You were in shock. Any father would be." The simplicity of her response caught him off guard. There was no accusation, no resentment, just understanding. Driven by a need to fill the ensuing silence, he asked, "Where did you learn to do that? The first aid? You acted like a trained professional." Anna hesitated for a moment, her fingers tapping lightly on the stainless steel counter. A shadow of sadness crossed her face before it was quickly controlled. She looked down at her own hands, as if the answer were written there. "It's a long story, Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice low. "A story from another country, from another life." The sentence hung in the air, freighted with a meaning he couldn't decipher. Another life. What did that mean? The mystery surrounding her only deepened. And Arthur realized that the woman who had saved his son was a far more complex enigma than he could have ever imagined. He had to know more, not just out of gratitude, but out of a growing sense that her story held a truth he desperately needed to hear. Arthur's curiosity morphed into a mild obsession. Anna's phrase, "a story from another country, from another life," took root in his mind. He found himself watching her more closely as she worked. There was an efficiency in her movements, a dignity in her posture that stood in stark contrast to the humility of her role. She wasn't just a cleaner, there was an undeniable aura of competence about her. He tried to strike up conversations at other times, but she was always polite and reserved, deflecting personal questions with a skill that both frustrated and intrigued him. There seemed to be an invisible wall around her, one that he, with all his influence and power, couldn't breach. The situation unsettled him. He was a man accustomed to getting answers, to being in control. Anna's passive resistance was a challenge he didn't know how to meet. Meanwhile, the absence of a nanny made the routine more chaotic. Agencies sent him profiles of candidates with resumes even more impressive than Beatrice's, but Arthur dismissed them with a newfound cynicism. The words certified, qualified, and experienced now sounded hollow, like marketing buzzwords for a defective product. His distrust extended to his social circle. Friends called to ask how Leo was, their voices dripping with a concern that now seemed false to him. They were the same people who had stood frozen, like garden statues, while his son drowned. He remembered their faces, the collective inaction, and a cold resentment grew in his chest. They were business partners, golf companions, but were they true friends? The crisis had revealed the fragility of the bonds he had thought were strong. They were relationships built on mutual interest and capital growth, not on loyalty or genuine care. He felt more alone than ever, a billionaire isolated in his ivory tower, realizing the walls weren't made of gold, but of brittle glass. One evening, exhausted after a day of trying to balance work with caring for Leo, he found Anna in the library. She was dusting a high shelf, the lamplight illuminating her focused expression. He decided to try a different, more direct approach. "Anna, I need to understand," he said, his voice softer than he intended. She turned, surprise in her eyes again. "Understand what, sir?" Your story. You told me it was from another life. What did you mean by that?" He saw the hesitation in her eyes, the internal battle between discretion and something else. She sighed, an almost inaudible sound. "Mr. Sterling, with all due respect, my story isn't interesting. I'm here to work, to clean your house. That's all." "No, it's not all," Arthur insisted, taking a step forward. "You saved my son's life with a skill that the most expensive nanny my money could buy didn't have. You refused a reward most people wouldn't think twice about. You are not just a cleaner. I need to know who you are." The intensity in his voice made her take a step back. Her eyes filled with an emotion he couldn't identify. Was it pain, longing, resignation? She looked toward the window, at the darkness outside, as if searching for an answer in the night. "Knowing my story won't change anything, sir," she whispered, more to herself than to him. "Some things are better left in the past." With that, she excused herself and left the library, leaving Arthur with more questions than answers, and the certainty that Anna's mystery was the key to understanding how misguided his own life had become. The week that followed was a silent torture for Arthur. Anna's evasiveness only sharpened his determination. He felt he was on the verge of an important discovery, something that transcended mere curiosity. It was like analyzing a promising but complex investment. He needed more data to make a decision. The opportunity came unexpectedly, On a rainy Saturday afternoon, Leo tripped while running down the hall and fell, hitting his head on the corner of a coffee table. The cut wasn't deep, but it bled profusely, and the boy's frightened cries echoed through the mansion. Arthur, whose panic in medical situations was almost paralyzing, felt the blood drain from his face. He scooped Leo into his arms, trying to soothe him while yelling for help. Unsure of what to do beyond pressing his hand to the wound, it was Anna who appeared first, coming from the laundry room with a basket of clothes. Seeing the scene, she didn't hesitate. She dropped the basket and approached with a quiet authority that immediately calmed the room. "Let me see, sir," she said, her voice firm but gentle. She took Leo from Arthur's trembling arms and sat him on the sofa. With quick, precise movements, she examined the cut. "Don't worry. Leo," she murmured to the boy, who was already quieting, mesmerized by her calm demeanor. "We'll get this fixed up, and you'll be all better." She asked the head housekeeper, who had arrived in a hurry, to bring the first aid kit. When the box arrived, Anna opened it and worked with the efficiency of a healthcare professional. She cleaned the wound with an antiseptic wipe, her hands steady yet delicate. She applied an ointment and then closed the gash with small surgical adhesive strips, butterfly stitches. Throughout the process, she spoke to Leo in a soft tone, explaining what she was doing and turning the frightening event into a small adventure. Arthur watched, fascinated. The dexterity, the knowledge, the way she handled the situation, none of it fit the image of a cleaner. This was the second time she had demonstrated a medical competence that left him bewildered. When it was over, Leo was calm, sporting a colorful bandage on his forehead and a lollipop in his hand, which Anna had magically produced from her apron pocket. The boy hugged her tightly before running off to show his battle wound to the housekeeper. Arthur and Anna were left alone in the room, the sound of the rain against the windows filling the silence. He looked at her with a new perspective. Curiosity had given way to an overwhelming certainty. "That's not luck or instinct," Arthur said, his voice low and thick with emotion. "No one learns to do that by cleaning floors. Who are you, Anna? Really? I'm not taking no for an answer anymore. You owe me, and my son, the truth." The formality was gone. It was a plea, a demand from a man who felt completely adrift. Anna looked down at her own hands, now clean, but which minutes before had staunched his son's bleeding. She sighed, a sound of surrender. The wall she had built around herself finally began to crumble. "You're right," she said, lifting her eyes to meet his. There were unshed tears there. "In my country, in my other life, I didn't clean houses, Mr. Sterling. I was the head nurse of the pediatric unit at one of the biggest hospitals in the capital." Anna's confession hung in the air like a mist, completely redefining the emotional landscape of the room. Arthur felt as if the floor had dropped out from under him. A pediatric nurse, the head of a hospital unit. The woman who cleaned his bathrooms and polished his silverware was more qualified to care for children than any of the candidates the elite agencies sent him. The irony was so staggering he almost laughed. He invited her to sit, a gesture that broke the invisible employer-employee barrier that had always existed between them. For the first time, he saw not an employee, but an equal, a professional whose value had been tragically underestimated. They sat on opposing sofas, the coffee table where Leo had been hurt between them. The rain outside created an intimate atmosphere, as if the world had faded away to allow this conversation to finally happen. Anna began to speak, hesitantly at first, then with a melancholic fluency, as if opening a long, locked chest. She told him about her life in her home country, a place she loved, but which had been ravaged by a devastating economic crisis. She spoke of her passion for nursing, her dedication to the children she treated. Her eyes lit up as she described the joy of seeing a young patient recover. The camaraderie with her fellow doctors and nurses. Arthur listened, captivated. He, a master of numbers and profit projections, was before a woman whose wealth was measured in lives saved and suffering eased. Her currency was compassion. She explained that she and her husband, an engineer, decided to immigrate to find a more stable future for their own children, who had been left behind with grandparents until they could get established. They sold their belongings, pooled their life savings, a modest but hard-earned sum, and came to the new country full of hope. The reality, however, was brutal. Their degrees, so valued back home, were worthless here without a long and costly validation process. "We discovered our knowledge wasn't enough," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "We needed papers, licenses, proof of proficiency in a new language. Our money ran out faster than we ever imagined." Anna's husband found a job in construction, working long hours for minimum wage. She, unable to practice her profession, took the first job she could find, a cleaner. "There is no shame in cleaning floors to support your family, Mr. Sterling," she said, her head held high. "The real pain is having the knowledge to help, to heal, and being prevented from using it. It's like having your hands tied while someone is in need." Arthur looked at her hands, the same hands that had saved Leo twice, and felt a pang of shame for his own initial judgment. He had seen her, but he hadn't seen her. He saw the uniform, not the woman. Her story wasn't just about hardship. It was about wasted talent, about immense potential being reduced to menial tasks. He thought of his own world, where people were valued by their assets, by the balance in their bank accounts. Anna had a net worth of knowledge and skill that didn't appear on any balance sheet, but was infinitely more valuable. The conversation deepened, and for the first time since losing Helena, Arthur felt a genuine connection to another person. He wasn't talking to an employee, but to a woman of extraordinary strength and resilience, whose journey was forcing him to reevaluate the true meaning of wealth. The revelation of Anna's past fundamentally changed the dynamic in the house. Arthur could no longer see her as he had before. When he saw her in the hallways, he no longer saw the cleaner, but the head nurse, the competent professional whom fate had cast in a role that did her no justice. He instructed the head housekeeper, Elvira, a discreet woman who had been with the family for years, to lighten Anna's duties, assigning her less strenuous responsibilities. He did it subtly, without explaining why, but the shift didn't go unnoticed. Anna, for her part, seemed more at ease in his presence. The barrier of formality had been cracked, allowing for small, natural conversations to spring up in the kitchen or the gardens. She would ask about his day, and he found himself genuinely interested in hers, asking about her children back home, about the hardships of her adjustment. He learned that the process to validate her degree was a bureaucratic and financial labyrinth. It required expensive courses, language proficiency exams, and a series of fees that were impossible to pay on her and her husband's salaries. It was a distant dream, a treasure locked in a vault to which she didn't have the key. Anna's relationship with Leo also blossomed. The boy, who had adored her since the pool incident, now sought her out constantly. When he scraped his knee on the playground, he ran to Anna, not Arthur. She knew exactly how to clean a cut, how to apply a bandage with a kiss to make it better, and how to turn tears into laughter. Arthur watched this interaction with a mixture of admiration and a pang of jealousy. Anna possessed an innate gift for caregiving, a patience and affection that he, clumsy and consumed by worry, struggled to show. He realized that for the past 2 years, he had focused on providing the best security, the best education, the best material goods for Leo, but had perhaps failed at the most fundamental thing, being genuinely and warmly present. He had been outsourcing not just supervision, but affection. One afternoon, he found them in the garden. Anna was teaching Leo how to make a paper airplane, a simple task that filled the boy with delight with every clumsy flight. They laughed together, and the scene was so natural, so full of a domestic peace his mansion rarely saw, that Arthur felt a tightening in his chest. It was an image of family, something he thought he had lost forever with Helena. He approached and sat on the grass with them, an act that would have been unthinkable a few weeks prior. He tried to make his own plane, but the result was a crumpled ball of paper, which sent Leo into fits of giggles. Anna, with a smile, guided his hands, showing him the correct folds. Her touch was brief, professional, yet it sent an unexpected wave of warmth through him. In that moment, sitting on the grass of his immaculate lawn with his son and the woman who had saved him, Arthur felt a simple, authentic happiness that no business acquisition, no dividend check had ever provided. He began to understand that life's true return on investment wasn't in the growth of his net worth, but in the richness of human connection. And the woman beside him, who possessed so little in material terms, was the wealthiest person he had ever met. The admiration he felt for her was turning into something deeper, something that both scared and drew him in. Arthur's transformation was palpable. His employees noticed it first. The boss, once known for his impatience and relentless focus on the bottom line, became more thoughtful, more human. He started delegating more, trusting his team, realizing that absolute control was an illusion that had almost cost him his son. He began leaving the office on time, declining invitations to business dinners and social events he once considered mandatory for maintaining his network. His social circle, the one comprised of the guests from that fateful party, began to dissipate. The calls became less frequent. Arthur didn't miss them. The superficiality of those relationships had become glaring. He traded conversations about stock market volatility and the latest crypto trends for talks with Leo about dinosaurs and superheroes. Slowly, the void in his life, which he had tried to fill with more work and more acquisitions, began to be filled by a real and warm presence. He started seeking out Anna's company, even for brief moments. A coffee in the kitchen in the morning, a walk through the garden in the late afternoon while Leo played. He listened intently when she spoke, absorbing the details of her life, her struggles and her dreams. Her story gave him a new perspective on what it meant to have assets. He had property, securities, a diversified stock portfolio. She had resilience, integrity, and an unshakable hope. Her net worth was invisible, but indestructible. One night, he found her in the library, reading a book. It was a pediatric nursing manual, old and yellowed with age. She closed it quickly, as if she'd been caught doing something wrong. "I'm sorry, sir. I was just finishing my shift." "No, please, continue," Arthur said, sinking into a nearby armchair. "You miss it, don't you? Your work." Her eyes filled with a profound longing. "Every day," she confessed in a whisper, "it's like a part of me is dormant. I read so I don't forget, to keep my mind sharp in case one day I can practice again." The simple passion in her words struck him deeply. He thought about himself. Did he love his work? Did he feel the same passion for closing a deal that she felt for caring for a child? The honest answer was no. His work was a game, a competition he was good at winning. It brought him power, status, and immense fortune. But it didn't bring him that light in his eyes he saw in Anna when she spoke of her profession. He realized that, in many ways, he too had his hands tied, trapped in a life he had built, but that perhaps didn't truly fulfill him. The conversation stretched late into the night. They spoke of dreams, of sacrifices, and of what really mattered at the end of the day. Arthur found himself sharing things about Helena he had never told anyone, about the loneliness he'd felt since she was gone. Anna listened with a quiet empathy, offering a comfort that came not from rehearsed words, but from a genuine understanding of pain. That night, in the stillness of the library, surrounded by books representing the world's knowledge, Arthur Sterling, the billionaire, felt like a student, and Anna, the cleaner, was his teacher, schooling him in a lesson on value, purpose, and the true nature of wealth that no business school could ever offer. The idea began as a seed in Arthur's mind, planted during their library conversation. Over the next few days, it germinated, growing strong and clear. Nurtured by every interaction he had with Anna and Leo, he watched them together, the ease with which she cared for the boy, the trust and affection Leo showed her. The solution to his dilemma, the need to find someone trustworthy to care for his son, had been right in front of him all along, hidden by his own prejudice and his narrow worldview. He had spent weeks reviewing fraudulent resumes and considering strangers for the most intimate and important position in his home, while the most qualified person in the world for that job was dusting his furniture. The irony was so profound it became a moral imperative for action. He could no longer ignore the injustice of Anna's situation. It wasn't just about validating a degree, it was about restoring a woman's dignity and allowing her talent to flourish. He, with his vast resources and connections, had the power to change the course of her life. It wouldn't be an act of charity, but an investment, the best investment he would ever make, an investment in human capital, in the person who had saved his most precious asset. Arthur set his vast machine of resources into motion. He contacted his top lawyer, a man accustomed to handling complex mergers and acquisitions, and gave him a new assignment: research every detail of the validation process for foreign healthcare degrees. He wanted to know the costs, the timelines, the requirements, the roadblocks. In less than 48 hours, he had a complete dossier on his desk. It was, as Anna had said, a costly and labyrinthine process designed to be discouraging. But for a man with Arthur's wealth and influence, the obstacles were merely items on a to-do list. He saw the costs, the courses, the exam registration fees, the certified translations, and the numbers that would have been an insurmountable mountain for Anna were, to him, the equivalent of a rounding error on his quarterly statements. The decision was made. It wasn't a business decision calculated to maximize profit, but a decision from the heart, guided by a new set of values he was learning to embrace. He chose the moment carefully. On a Friday evening, after Leo was asleep, he asked Anna to come to his office. The room, once a symbol of his power and intimidation, now just felt like a part of the house. She entered, looking apprehensive, perhaps thinking she had done something wrong. Arthur gestured for her to sit in the chair opposite his desk, the same chair where he had fired Beatrice, but this time the tone was completely different. He didn't sit behind the desk, in his position of power. Instead, he pulled a chair around and sat beside her, putting them on the same level. On the desk between them lay the dossier prepared by his lawyers. "Anna," he began, his voice calm and serious, "we've had a few talks over the past few days, and I've been thinking a lot about your situation, about your dream." She looked at the folder, confused, not understanding where he was going. "I know you refuse my financial help," he continued, "and I respect that. That's why what I'm about to propose isn't a reward. It's not a gift. It's a business proposition, a mutual investment in our future. In mine, in yours, and most importantly, in Leo's." The climax didn't happen with a grand event, a fiery speech, or an emotional outburst. It happened there, in the quiet of the mahogany office, in a decision that would redefine all their lives. Arthur opened the folder and turned it to face Anna. Inside, spreadsheets detailed costs, timelines, and steps. There were application forms for prep courses, information on proficiency exams, and the contacts for a firm specializing in assisting foreign professionals. It was a complete roadmap, a map to the treasure she thought she had lost forever. "I want to pay for all of this," Arthur said, gesturing to the papers. "Every cent, the entire process to validate your nursing degree." Anna stared at him, her eyes wide with shock, her mouth slightly agape. She shook her head as if she couldn't believe what she was hearing. "Mr. Sterling, I can't accept. It's a fortune. I could never pay you back." He held up a hand to stop her. "You don't understand, Anna. As I said, this isn't charity, it's a proposal. While you study, I want to hire you. Not as a cleaner, but as what you truly are." He paused, letting the weight of his next words settle. "I want you to be my son's private nurse and head of care. I want you to oversee everything related to his health and well-being. I want you to use your knowledge, your experience," he went on, his voice filled with the sincerity she had never heard from anyone. "The salary will be commensurate with your actual qualifications, not the role you were forced to take. It will be a salary that reflects your true value and knowledge, the value you've already proven twice over. In return, I will have the peace of mind of knowing that the person caring for my son is not only the most qualified on paper, but the one with the best character. The person I trust most in this world." The tears Anna had been holding back for so long finally began to fall. They streamed silently down her face, tears not of sadness, but of a gratitude and relief so profound they were almost painful. Arthur's offer wasn't just money, it was validation, it was respect, it was the key that unlocked the door to the invisible prison she had been living in. He wasn't just giving her a future, he was giving her back her past, her identity. "Why?" she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "Why are you doing this?" Arthur looked into her eyes, and for the first time, he allowed the vulnerability he felt to show. "Because you, Anna, the woman who jumped in a pool to save a life, ended up saving two. You saved me from myself. You taught me that true wealth isn't in what you have in mutual funds or gold bars, but in the courage to risk everything for who you love. And I need you in our lives. Leo needs you, I need you." The final confession hung between them, heavy with a meaning that went far beyond a job offer. It was the acknowledgement of a connection, of an emotional dependency that had become the new anchor in his life. In that moment, the multimillionaire wasn't the boss offering a position, and she wasn't the employee accepting. They were two souls brought together by a traumatic event, finding in each other the missing piece to heal their own wounds. Anna accepted. The word was just a whisper, but it resonated in the office with the force of a decree. In that instant, the final barriers between them crumbled, replaced by a new kind of relationship built on respect, admiration, and a growing affection. Life in the mansion was transformed. Anna stopped wearing a work uniform and, with a generous advance on her new salary, bought clothes that reflected her true professional identity. She was no longer a figure in the shadows. She became a central, vibrant presence in the home. Arthur officially introduced her to Leo as his new head of care, and the boy, who already loved her, accepted the news with infectious joy. For him, the change only made official what his heart already knew. Anna was the person who made him feel safe and loved. The validation process for Anna's degree began immediately. With Arthur's resources removing every financial and bureaucratic hurdle, she dove into her studies with a fierce determination. The nights she once spent exhausted from physical labor were now dedicated to books, reigniting the passion that had lain dormant. Arthur would often find her in the library, surrounded by manuals and notes, and would sit with her, offering coffee or just quiet company. In these still moments, their friendship deepened, woven with conversations about the future, about her children, whom Anna could now send substantial financial support to, planning for them to join her as soon as her situation stabilized, and about the small joys of Leo's day-to-day life. Arthur, too, changed irrevocably. He shed his superficial social circle without a shred of regret. He sold his stake in a few high-stress, low-purpose businesses, rebalancing his investment portfolio to focus on companies with a positive social impact. His concept of return had been recalibrated. He started spending more time with Leo, not as a supervisor, but as an active participant in his childhood. He learned how to throw a baseball, build blanket forts in the living room, and not be afraid of looking silly. He was rediscovering what it meant to be a father, a role he had neglected in his relentless pursuit of more wealth and power. Anna's presence was the catalyst for this change. She taught him, by her example, about patience, empathy, and the importance of small gestures. The admiration and respect Arthur felt for her blossomed into a deep and genuine love, a feeling he thought he'd never experience again after Helena's death. It was a different kind of love, more mature, built not on the overwhelming passion of youth, but on a solid foundation of shared experience, mutual respect, and profound gratitude. One evening, months later, as they watched Leo sleeping peacefully in his bed, Arthur took Anna's hand. It wasn't a calculated move, but a natural impulse, a need for physical connection that mirrored the emotional bond that already existed between them. She looked at him, her brown eyes shining in the soft lamplight, and squeezed his hand back. No words were spoken, but they both understood. They were no longer boss and employee. They were partners. They were a family. The woman he had hired to clean his house had ended up cleaning his soul, showing him where the real filth was and helping him find the light. 2 years passed. Arthur Sterling's mansion, once a stage for displays of wealth and empty talk, had transformed into a vibrant home, filled with laughter and the sound of little feet running down the halls. The garden, where an opulent party had nearly ended in tragedy, was now the setting for family picnics and games of hide and seek. Anna, her nursing degree proudly validated and displayed in her own home office, was not just Leo's head of care. She was the matriarch of this new family. Her children, a boy and a girl, had arrived from her home country and adapted beautifully to their new life, filling the house with a missing energy and joy. Arthur, who had at first feared he wouldn't have room in his heart for other children, discovered that love doesn't divide, it multiplies. He welcomed them as his own, finding new joy in being a father figure to them as well. The relationship between Arthur and Anna had blossomed into a marriage built on a solid partnership and a deep love. They married in a simple, intimate ceremony in the mansion's garden, surrounded only by the children and a small circle of true friends they had cultivated. There was no ostentation, no clinking crystal glasses for an indifferent audience. There was only the sincere celebration of two people who had found each other in the wreckage of their lives and built something beautiful and lasting. Arthur continued to transform his business. He established a foundation, funded with a significant portion of his personal fortune, dedicated to helping skilled immigrants validate their degrees and re-enter their professional fields. The Second Chance Foundation, as they named it, became his primary project, his true legacy. He used his capital, his network, and his business acumen not to accumulate more for himself, but to create a cash flow of opportunity for others. Anna was the foundation's director, using her own experience to guide and inspire hundreds of people who, like her, had so much to offer but had been silenced by bureaucracy and prejudice. Leo grew into a happy, secure, and kind boy, blessed with the wisdom of 2 cultures and the love of a large, blended family. He never forgot the day at the pool, not as a trauma, but as the story of how his mama Anna came into his life. It was his family's origin story, a tale of courage and how real heroes don't always wear capes. On a sunny autumn afternoon, Arthur watched from the veranda. Anna was in the garden with the 3 children, teaching them how to plant a small oak tree. Their laughter drifted on the air, the most precious melody he had ever heard. He thought of his old life, the relentless pursuit of more money, more status, more power. It seemed like a life lived by someone else in a distant, colorless world. He realized the true measure of a man was not his net worth, but the wealth of his heart, the strength of his relationships, and the positive impact he left on the world. He was no longer just a multimillionaire. He was a husband, a father, a philanthropist, The woman who had jumped into a pool to save his son's life hadn't just saved Leo, and she hadn't just saved Arthur. With her act of courage and the dignity of her journey, she had saved the future for all of them, teaching a man who had everything that true wealth isn't what you accumulate, but what you share, and the love you have the courage to build.